intelligence analysis and modeling, as well as cybersecurity. While in college, he did research for Penn State's International Center for the Study of Terrorism and held a top-secret full-scope and poly-security clearance until graduation. He also worked as a lab assistant at the College of IST for Dr. Glynn and Dr. Guare K. In addition, he completed work under Colonel J. Graham in creating a new capstone course for the SRA major. Since graduation, Ryan has bootstrapped a startup in digital retail Cinemarama, as well as co-found a technology company called mhoto. Please welcome. And as a quick announcement, please, you can text your questions to 37607 with IST Startup. And please use hashtag IST Startup whenever you text or like tweet, Instagram. And please silence your phones. Thank you.
Thank you. Hear me okay? Okay. Like she said, I co-founded 2 startups after graduation. The first one is Cinemarama, which I actually co-founded, or I founded during my senior year of college. It's a digital retail store that not only has the highest payout for artists across all mediums, but it's also the first service to streamline commercial licensing, which basically means that if a filmmaker goes on there and they need music for their next film, they can actually just go on there and request a commercial license, and legally they have the rights after they negotiate the price and the payout. The other startup is called mhoto, which is a technology company that composes brand new music based off of the analysis of photos, videos, and text. So if, for example, our first client was HBO, and they actually used it to score their newest show, which was called Silicon Valley. It actually aired last week. So with that, though, there was actually a couple weeks ago a fallout. So despite the fact that the title of my conference is kind of creating startups on the side, there's something I wanted to address, which is that I remember 2 years ago when I was listening to Steve Huffman speak on startups in the Cybertorium, he said something that was along the lines of, don't worry about the business side, don't worry about doing the NDAs and those sorts of contracts, and just get the product out first. And up until a couple of weeks ago, I would have agreed with him. But in light of recent events, I would say that I actually greatly disagree with him now. Without going into the full details, I'm just going to say that I'm actually no longer working on mhoto, and it's not exactly something that I wanted to happen. However, I don't want my speaking conference to be fully about that. So with that, I want to say that I want to be answering your questions regardless of what it may be about. So, I mean, I've dealt with a lot of different industries. So with Cinemarama, I've dealt with dealing with friends, trying to have them pay them to actually work for me versus trying to partner with them. I've dealt with lawyers, contract law, DMCAs. I've spoken at some of the biggest tech conferences in America, such as New York Tech Day and TechCrunch Disrupt. I have also learned quite a lot about patent law. So if you have any questions regarding those mediums, feel free to ask. I'm more here for you guys than trying to advertise any sort of business or anything. I just want to be able to help you guys. So with that, I'm just going to say, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand at any point in time. And if there's no questions right now, then I'll just keep talking about various aspects of my startup life. As the title of my speaking session suggested, I do work full-time for Capital One at the same time. So that alone presents quite a few problems, because you're working 9 to 5 or later in addition to actually working on a business or two. I mean, as of right now, I'm obviously on vacation. So I'm taking vacation days to actually talk about things I'm also working on, which kind of, it creates an interesting issue of balancing not only, your personal life with your work life, but also just balancing your freedom with things that you actually want to work on. With regards to Capital One, though, for example, I had to actually register Cinemarama as an LLC before I even started working there. Otherwise, they would have actually owned the company, because the employment contracts with a couple of companies kind of include intellectual property. So if you actually work on it and if it gets enough traction and if it's making money and they find out about it, they actually could potentially try and take it. So that was actually one of the first things that I had to deal with was my senior year, when I had accepted my job already and then I decided to start my first startup. I had to deal with figuring out what I was going to do, because I didn't know anything, the difference between LLCs, C Corps, S Corps. To me it was all a bunch of mumble jumble that I didn't know anything about. So at that point in time, I actually had to make a decision quickly to register before my first work day. So I actually was lucky enough that I knew a lawyer that was willing to help me out with that for free beforehand. With LLCs, personally, my personal advice is to do LLCs if you're starting it on your own. With C Corps and S Corps, you have a lot of other tax issues, which will essentially increase the cost of you bootstrapping your business. With mhoto is actually a C Corp, which costs about $1,000 a year to maintain, just for the status of C Corp alone. So that is also why I wouldn't recommend it, because you're essentially just spending money that you could otherwise use, in actual development of your product or development of things that you need to expand your business. In regards to tech conferences, the two biggest ones I went to were New York Tech Day and TechCrunch Disrupt. New York Tech Day was in New York City in April. It's actually starting again in a couple of weeks. I was actually supposed to go there again this year. New York Tech Day versus TechCrunch Disrupt, I would highly recommend TechCrunch Disrupt. I have not been to South by Southwest though. It's the one that I was actually hoping to go to, but I have not had the chance to. TechCrunch Disrupt is a good place to get press, but if you're looking for consumer feedback, if you're looking for actual gaining user bases, it's not the conference. I know it's advertised as being the conference, and I know it's the biggest conference that people know about, but it's not something that you should go to if you're looking for consumers, because the only things you will find there are investors and press. So if you're looking for press, that's great. You should go there because they get some of the biggest press out there. That's where we got Engadget and Entrepreneur Magazine. But New York Tech Day, you get not only investors and press, but you also have, it's open admission to the public. So you get around 10,000 visitors within an 8-hour period. So not only are you getting a ton of people coming by your booth and giving you consumer-facing feedback, which I find is the most important, because that's where you're looking for your applications. That's where you're looking for, do people like this? What are they seeing wrong with this? And they have no reason to hold back on you. They're not there to be nice or anything. So it's people that are just everyday people passing by and what they think of your product. But with TechCrunch Disrupt, I ran into interesting because they have this thing called Battlegrounds, which is where a lot of startups go and they actually compete against each other and pitch for investment money. Now, with the Battlegrounds, the interesting thing that you will notice if you attend TechCrunch Disrupt is that the judges actually have investments in the majority of the companies that are pitching there. And you will find that the most interesting companies, if they don't have investments with them, they're not going to win. And at the end of the day, when it went to the final three, all final three companies were highly invested by the judges. And so it's not something that, like I said, is not the best conference if you're looking for a very honest opinion of things, because it's not exactly the most honest of conferences. I'm just going to open this for questions right now, just to see if there's any questions in particular. Oh, yeah.
So what are the events that you would recommend?
I went to a couple in DC. Oh yeah. What are the conferences that I would recommend going to? So New York Tech Day is my favorite by far. There are a couple in DC that I liked, but at the same time it really depends on your industry, because DC is very business oriented, very military oriented. So if you go to, for example, pitch competitions in DC and you're in the entertainment sector, you're most likely going to be going up against people that are doing things for either government agencies or doing things for the military. And so you're going to stand out, but not in a way that's going to really benefit you, because the investors there are going to care about, you know, how does this benefit this? Like most of the investors there care about military government agencies and or direct business. So I mean, entertainment is very minimized down there, which is why New York conferences tend to be a lot better for entertainment. So it's just kind of knowing which conferences suit your industries. Lisa, did you have?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, yeah.
So I currently work at like a small startup, and if I was to, like say, work on my own side project, and I didn't actually sign any intellectual property stuff, do you still think it would be a good idea to register as an LLC?
So as a side to your other startup, or as a side, like, sorry, okay. At least in regards to, you know, if you're worried about your startup that you're working at right now, kind of claiming ownership, I wouldn't worry that much about it. I mean, unless you haven't signed anything for your current startup, because I would say that sorting out the details between, at least if you have co-founders, is very important, because what can happen is, especially if you have some sort of hardware or patented device, then the creator of that device is going to have their name attached to that. So say if you have 3 people, one person is the creator of the hardware or the patent device, and then the other 2 people, maybe one person does business and the other person does finance or something. The person that has their name on the patent is going to have more authority if they actually wanted to challenge the equity of the other 2 people. So if, for example, they said, oh, I want 50% and you 2 can have 25% each, when originally you guys had agreed to 33% each. They would have more authority in court, because not only is the patent in their name, but because you haven't agreed to anything. That's the only like hard written proof that someone's contributing something to the project. But as far as doing a startup on the side of your other startup, I don't think you would have to, unless your side project involves other people, I don't think you would have to worry about separating the two, unless it's hard written into some sort of contract you're signing with the startup or with the company that you're working for. Because with Capital One, what happened was they had a contract with, or in their employment contract, they had prior work, and then it was, I forget what the clause is called, but basically it says if you work on projects or ideas basically during Capital One time, then you are going to, or if you take vacation during to work on other businesses, they can fire you. But in addition to that, if you work on other projects during Capital One time, they can own it. And the problem, at least with because I wrote their HR people before I actually registered, the problem is that proving that you aren't doing it on Capital One time, or the employment time. So if you, for example, went to, sorry, for example, if you were working, on your startup from 6 p.m. until midnight every night, and suddenly it got super popular, and to them they might say, hey, how did he do this without working while he was supposed to be working on our project? And so obviously you would have to have some sort of proof that you weren't working while you were supposed to be working. So, I mean, it comes into a legal battle that you don't really need to deal with. I mean, I wouldn't want to deal with. So, I mean, it was more of a precautionary type thing. I don't know if they would actually ever try and claim ownership of something. I don't know if that's, I know that half of that is probably written because they want people, like if, for example, if you do a startup, like with Capital One, if I did something for banking industry, they would probably say, well, we influenced you, or we, you know, aided you with information on this industry, so therefore, you know, we should have a part in this project. So especially if you're working in an industry that you're already working in, like if you're doing a project in that industry, I would highly recommend it. Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, you mentioned LLC. You didn't mention liability, which is sort of one of the main reasons why somebody would want to
Right.
insulate. So, is
Yeah.
this a concern for you?
Well, with Cinemarama, because it's digital retail, so DMCA is a big issue with it. So that's actually the other reason why I chose LLC, is because of copyright infringement laws and liability regarding such things. So with Cinemarama and DMCA laws, there's a lot of gray area, is at least the way that my lawyers explain it to me, as to whether or not you have to do takedowns and do various things regarding that. So, for example, if someone uploaded, you know, and sold like Rihanna's album on my site without Rihanna's permission, without paying Rihanna, obviously that would cause, you know, a legal dispute between the label and me, because then they would say that I'm facilitating it. But separating yourself from that, so the LLC allows me to, if, for example, the label sued my company, and that would cause maybe my company had to owe them, you know, like $10 million. And I didn't have $10 million. It would allow me to kind of separate myself, so I myself did not have to go bankrupt over the company going under. So, I mean, that's why also, before you register, I would highly recommend getting at least a free consultation from a lawyer as to which, not only which form of business you want to start, like an LLC, C Corp, S Corp, but also which state you want to register in, as state laws can also vary, and the way that they benefit you also varies. So, for example, I know with DMCA laws, Washington and I think it's Delaware. Washington and Delaware, I think, are the two main ones for it because of the laws regarding liability. But I mean, it varies depending on which industry you're in and, you know, what exactly you're doing. So, anything else? Let's see. The way Moto formed. I was actually at a tech conference in DC for Cinemarama when I met my co-founder, Daniel, at the same conference. And this conference was very, I mean, I didn't know about it until I got there, but it was very for military and government agencies. It was actually the third DC conference I went to. So I wasn't expecting it at all, but it was also a pitch competition. And as I was watching these pitch competitions, I noticed that there was this other guy that wasn't in the pitch competition. He was just sitting back and watching it all. So I started talking to him about why he was there, and he told me about his startup, which involved business side cloud services, essentially. And when I told him about Cinemarama, he pulled me aside and he said, "There's this other idea I'm thinking about," and that's what Moto was. At that point, it was just an idea in his head, and he didn't really want to pursue it until he had other people on board. So from there, we exchanged information, and took about 3 months until he said, you know, I want to be partners with you, because I really think that we could do this venture. And Penn State's InnoBlue, I don't know if you guys have heard of them, but they do a lot of startup work. So I was actually subscribed as an alumni, and they sent out an email 4 days before New York Tech Day saying that they had like a 50% off thing. And this was actually my first conference, and since we had just gotten our first prototype out for Moto, I said, you know what, why don't we do this? It's already half off. So we ended up going to New York Tech Day that day, and we got probably about 600 signups in a few hours, as well as 4 investor contacts. And from there, it just kind of escalated to the point of more traveling, essentially. One of my friends invested in it, and we ended up going to TechCrunch Disrupt that August or September. And from there, that's when we got on Engadget and Al Jazeera America and Entrepreneur Magazine. And then HBO contacted us about a month later to actually, they were filming an episode of Silicon Valley, which is actually this coming episode on this weekend. They were recreating TechCrunch Disrupt. And when the producer stopped by our booth, when he heard about it, he said, you know what, we'll give this a shot. Why don't we give you some clips and some photos of our actors and see, how you can score our show. So it was interesting because it kind of evolved from not just how you present yourself, but also, knowing where to look. Because if we hadn't been there and just we were just going about our day and talking to everyone. We would talk to the janitors that would just walk by, and we would just pitch to them. We would pitch to everyone that we could, because you never know who you meet. And with Engadget, it was actually really interesting because this quiet person walks up to our booth, and they're not really asking anything, and we're just talking to them about what it does and what it is. And she just quickly makes a little note on this little notepad she was carrying, and she said, "Thank you," and she walks off. And then a little while later, she comes back with this guy with a video camera and all this setup, and he was like, "Yeah," she told me all about it. And then he just starts filming, and then that's when Al Jazeera America noticed too. So when you really present yourself to anyone, you don't know who they're going to tell. And from there, we actually got more investor contacts just from those articles alone. And then that's when Forbes did an interview with me about a month ago, and we ended up getting a lot of extra press from that as well. It's dealing with media has also been a very interesting experience, just because you don't really know how it operates until I guess it actually happens to you. Because with Forbes, I had no idea how articles for Forbes were written, because they contacted me in November and it wasn't even published until February. So I had no idea that it would even take that long to kind of go through the entire process that they have in their back end. But once you start realizing how to, I guess, play the game, it's a game that you do have to play. I don't like playing games, but it's, you have to have this smile on your face. You have to be super energetic and talking up, this is, you really want to pay attention to it. Because I remember with Al Jazeera America, they were at the booth next to us, and they were filming these the startup right next to us. And Daniel says to the cameraman, he's like, "Man, you're filming the wrong spot." And the cameraman turns around and he's like, "Why is that?" And he starts telling him all about this, and the cameraman walks away, and he comes back, and he's like, "Okay, we're doing this." And so we actually ended up getting a 15-minute interview, and that's all just because, we were just pretending it's playing the game of saying, this is what you want to see. And, that's not just what media, but investors too. Investors want to see that you have confidence in your companies. And investors want to see that you not only believe in them from the standpoint of what you really want to do, but also believe in them in that they are things that are going to make them money. Even if you're not in it for the money, they are. And so they're going to want you to believe that you can get them their return. The Forbes article was primarily about an investment offer we received back in November. It was for $250,000, and we turned it down. And Forbes found that quite perplexing because it wasn't just about the equity that they were asking for, but it was also about who they were. And I personally want to be known as someone who only deals with people that actually have the interests of the business in addition to their money. And I know that with the investors that I was dealing with, they weren't. There's a couple types of investors that you'll run into, and some of them won't care about what the business is that they're investing. Some of the investors will literally just throw money and hope that one of them sticks so that they can cash out. And then there will be other investors that will actually throw money into businesses that they truly believe in. And that's why when dealing with investments, sometimes personal contacts are actually a very good way to go about it. If you know people that like investing in things, if you can explain to your best friend why your company is awesome or why your idea is really good, you're going to have an investor that actually cares about your product. And so it's not just about the money, though, because then they can help you get contacts. They can help you get, like for example, Cinemarama. Getting artists is a huge difficulty thing, because not only are artists signed to labels, but they are tied down to contracts. So distribution contracts are going to be difficult to break. So finding artists that are either one, willing to break those contracts, or two, not signed to those contracts is something that's a very difficult process. And I know that the investments that I've been given, those people actually either have ties to the music industry or they have a deep intrinsic interest into the artistic industry. So I have friends in New York who would, go out to comedy clubs and be like, oh, you should go up on this site and sign up and sell your stuff through here because, you can sell your live videos there. And then I have contacts in LA who have invested in it, and they're like, yeah, one of the guys lives in Seattle, which is a huge music scene. He says he goes around telling everyone about it. And those are the types of investors that I like to have, because those are the people that are putting their time and effort to not only make it a big thing, but they actually care. And so that's essentially what the article was about, and that's why I loved that article so much, because it highlighted a mentality that I believe in, and it's not something that I know many people in the startup industry really highlight. Is you might run across a chance to cash out very fast, and at the end of the day you have to say to yourself, why are you really doing this? Is it for the money, or is it for something that you actually believe in? And so I think that's an important thing to stress upon, that if you truly believe in something, would you actually sell it for a certain amount, or would you try and see if it can be something great and you can still control it? Do you have any other questions? Okay.
You did a lot of work for Penn State's International Center for Study of Terrorism while you were a student. Why didn't you pursue a government-related job after graduation?
So I was going to intern for the NSA my junior year. I got my top secret clearance through them. And then what happened was there was a budget cut at the NSA right before the internship started. And so they actually ended up cutting the internship program. And so I never actually got to intern with them, but I got to keep my clearance, which was kind of cool. But I ended up interning for KPMG that semester, or that summer. And after that, I applied to Booz Allen Hamilton and a couple other places, but at the end of the day, I really wanted to work on other things. I knew that my junior year is that I wanted freedom outside of work, And so I was really looking for the workplace with the best work-life balance. And so I know that with a government job, you have, especially with one with the top secret clearance, you have to go into the office. You are in a locked room, you know, you can't work from home. You can't just, you know, randomly, like with Capital One, I could work from 10 to 2 and then maybe like 6 at night to 9 p.m. They wouldn't care as long as I got my work done. With government jobs, you know, you're going to be working those set hours. So, I mean, it comes down to, it wasn't worth it to me. So I mean, it was something that I thought was really cool, but after thinking about it for a long time, I didn't think that it was something that I really wanted to be doing in the long run. Yeah. I have 3 lawyers right now. One's for copyright, one's for patent, and one's for general contract law. Luckily, I mean, I had no idea I needed 3 lawyers at the time, so it kind of just grew over time. But I mean, the lawyers will be happy to tell you that you need another lawyer. I mean, they love referring you to their friends who are also lawyers and having you sign contracts with them. But I mean, the interesting thing with lawyers, though, is there are different types of lawyers that you can find. I found a startup lawyer, so for my general contract law, which was my first lawyer. And the nice thing about those is they don't charge hourly. They charge you by the contract, which is worlds cheaper than hourly, because she spent, I have one of the most complicated contracts she's ever worked on, she said, because of the whole commercial licensing thing. She spent probably an upwards of 4 weeks on it, which at $400 an hour is not a cheap thing. But she charged me a flat fee for it. And those are the, I mean, it kind of goes back to the investors. There are different types of people in each aspect of the startup world. And if you find, for example, my developers for Cinemarama that I hired also are, one of them's a musician and the other guy's a graphic designer, and both of which actually are interested in the project. I mean, I'm still paying them, obviously, but at the same time, they'll do things and they'll suggest things that would benefit them as a consumer and not as a developer. And so when you have people that are intrinsically interested, you get people like that. Or you get, for example, my contract lawyer gave me one of the contracts for free just because she thought the idea was cool. So, I mean, you really, if you search around, you'll find people that believe in what you want. So, I mean, with lawyers, I mean, even though everyone likes to portray lawyers as soulless or whatever, but, you know, they're good people at the end of the day. Yeah. No, it was you, yeah.
So you talked about having a job and then doing your startup on the side. You know, and some startups, they just go right for the startup and don't even get the other job. Which would you say you think is a better idea?
It becomes a difficult trade-off, really. Because, I mean, one, you're sacrificing time, but it really depends on how you're building your startup. So with Cinemarama, since I am not the developers, I don't do back-end development or front-end development for it, it becomes a lot easier because then before work, you know, I can message my developers and be like, hey, you know, I need this, this, and this done. They'll work on it while I'm at work, and then I come home, and then they'll send me a Skype message, and they'll be like, oh, hey, check this out, check this for bugs, which I like, and that works for Cinemarama. For mhoto, I know that when you have co-founders, especially ones that do not have a job, they expect all of your time to be devoted to it outside of it because, you know, they want you to make up for it. So it really depends on your working relationship and who else you're working with. But
do you ever see yourself like quitting Bank of America for your startup? Not mhoto, but
yeah, if I could, yeah. So I mean, obviously it's nice to have a fallback though. So I mean, for example, with mhoto, we had that $250,000, and I know that my co-founder was pressuring me to quit my job if we got a $250,000 investment, and that's not enough security for me, because after expenses on not only my personal expenses, which I would need to pay my bills, but also expenses for development, marketing, going to conferences and everything else, you're left with maybe like $10,000 in reserve if everything falls apart within a year. And yeah. So I mean, that's why I said, like, yeah, it sounds like a lot of money, but then after you consider everything that you have to pay for and everything that you need to kind of get things off the ground and get profitable, it's not enough to just quit your job. I mean, it's very risky, and that it kind of sets you in the mentality of one that I don't necessarily agree with, which is continually searching for additional investments. With Cinemarama, what I like to do is I like to get the smallest amount of investments as possible for the smallest amount of equity as possible. So, I mean, I would get, nothing big, but enough so that I can pay for, development or pay my lawyers. And then I would bootstrap the rest, because I don't want, I don't want 10 investors on board that own 40% of the company. I don't. Yeah, exactly. Or even, I mean, like, you read about it all the time. You read about people that are the founders of companies, and they end up getting kicked out because the investors don't want them there, because they want to bring in someone that they've worked with as, for the past 10 businesses that they've invested in. They want him as their CEO. So why would they want you there? So, I mean, if you keep selling your company, you're losing a power in your own company. And it's just, I mean, it's a different mentality, and it's just not one that I necessarily would agree with. Anything else?
I have another question. What is something you wish you knew as a student at Penn State?
Something that I wish, what was the question?
You.
Sorry. Wish knew? Well, that's a lot of questions. A lot of things I wish I knew. Especially, I wish I had started earlier on startups. I wish I had started maybe my sophomore year. Because especially in the college environment, you're in an area where you don't have to worry about much outside of paying your tuition, paying your room and board. And you don't have to worry too much about going to work every day. You don't have to worry about, all your expenses and bills. Like, I mean, yeah, you obviously still have expenses and bills, but when you leave college, those just multiply. And so if you start earlier, you're going to have an easier time, either one, bootstrapping it, because you won't have to pay other people for something that you can do, because you will have the time to do it, unless you're overloaded on coursework. But or you can work with your friends. And I mean, this is a great environment to actually bring on board your friends. I would not bring on board my friends after college, because at that point then you're both mixing not only your work, like your 9 to 5 with your startup, but also their 9 to 5, which could not be a 9 to 5. It might be a 7 to 2 in the morning, and you don't know. And so, I mean, you're mixing a bunch of other additional variables, unless you can get someone that's literally just dedicated to that. But at the same time, then you run into the issues of, I mean, their expectation of you. Because if you're working a 9 to 5 and they're not, then they're going to view it as an unequal partnership. But I guess wish I knew is that the professors here are actually very, very knowledgeable, and I know that Dr. Glantz helped me a lot throughout my years, because I first had him my freshman year of college, and I ended up TAing for him up until I graduated. But in addition to that, I mean, I would talk to him about Cinemarama, I would talk to him about a plethora of things, and not only did he know about, business side, because he used to work in the business college, but, he would bounce ideas off of it. He would say, have you thought about this and this? Because, he used to work in risk analysis, so he would think of risky situations or think problems that could arise. I mean, and there's plenty of other professors like that, like Szymanski, I know knows a lot about law, so if you had legal questions, I'm sure you could actually go to him. That'd be more of a free consultation because, I mean, he's a professor and he's just there to help you guys. And so, I mean, I guess I wish I went to professors more to bounce things off of as well. Anything else? Yeah.
Why did you say that you thought about before putting anything?
I worked in the music industry for about 7 years before I started Cinemarama. I started out in web design, and I started working for a couple bands, which ended up jumping me into managing those bands, which was not my intention, but I would say it started about 3 years beforehand because one of the bands that I worked for was contracted out by Sony, and it didn't end well. And I don't know, if you work in the entertainment industry long enough, you grow to hate it. Like the musicians and the filmmakers that I meet now, I mean, they all have a lot of problems with the way the industry is currently run. And so it was more of me seeing that and me saying, I want to try at least change it. So, I mean, I wanted to help them in any way, shape, or form, and I knew that digital retail was one of the ones that kind of screws them over financially. Because I know with iTunes and those places, not only are you losing 30% off the top, but you also have to pay for distribution, especially if you're an independent. And if you're not an independent, then you're losing even more. But and I knew that, so I mean, I took what I hated about that portion of the industry, and I just said, you know what, I'm going to try and do away with the parts that I hate. And so, I mean, it was about 3 years. It was kind of brewing in the back of my head. Originally, it was actually only 4 musicians before I even called it that. But then I met a filmmaker towards the end of my senior year, and he was telling me about the film industry and its similarities. And so I started thinking to myself, I was like, if iTunes sells movies, music, and whatnot, why don't, if we combine, every artistic industry together, you can kind of create a way that you don't need a label, because if you combine, artists, graphic designers, you don't need people from the label to produce your album artwork. You don't need filmmakers, you don't need label paid video producers to produce your music videos. So I mean, it stemmed from originally music, and it kind of centered around that, but then when I thought about it more and more, it just kind of evolved. And that's the one thing I noticed about startup ideas, is that they definitely evolve over time. So I mean, the more you think about it, the more it's going to change. Anything else? Yeah.
Is there anything in terms of coursework, anything in terms of things you could have learned here that in hindsight would have been useful?
More web design languages. I mean, I self-taught myself everything I knew about web design, which is, I mean, even though I don't do the design or development of Cinemarama, I still find it so beneficial that I actually know web design, because I can actually talk to them in a language that, they don't have to translate to me. I can just translate it back to them. And it's more of me telling them more precisely what I want than them being, oh, we're going to make this icon flashy. Or what, like, I mean, I don't know if you've ever listened to the way people who describe web design to others who don't really know anything about web design. Because I mean, they have to simplify it so much, and it causes miscommunication. So I think definitely understanding more and more languages benefits you greatly, even if you're not using it, because then you can communicate to the people that do use it. Which I know that you guys already added a couple languages this year, or programming classes this year. So, but I don't know if you guys have any because I remember there was a web development course that I took. I don't know if you have anything more advanced right now.
Minor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Mobile and web development.
Cool. Yeah, I wish I could take that then. That's something I wish. Anything else? All right. Trying to see if, let me think if there's any other particular stories I can think of to. With Cinemarama, I know I covered this before, but I originally did try and get my friends working on it. Some of them wanted to be paid, which was interesting, because paying your friends is such a weird thing. But, you know, that's why I do wish that I had started earlier, because all my friends were graduating as well. So, I mean, they had loans to pay, they had things to do as well. So, I mean, they would view it as, you know, using up their time, which, you know, it's not their idea, so it's not something that they would intrinsically want as much as I would. So I think that maybe if I had started a couple of years beforehand, they probably would have been more willing to kind of work on it with me instead of work on it for me. I remember back my freshman year, I had tried something which wasn't exactly Cinemarama, but it was music related with one of my friends. But I mean, those ideas we got to like a prototype essentially, and you know, my friend kind of started to lose interest. So I mean, that you run across that issue as well. So if you deeply care about something and you notice that the people that are working on it with you don't necessarily care as much, you might run into issues down the line, because nobody's going to care about it as much as you do unless they are as intrinsically as involved. And I know with startups that's a lot harder to, I mean, you can't force someone to be intrinsically involved. So with starting up a company with your friends, it's, oh yes.
But when you say starting up a company with your friends, it's hard to get them intrinsically involved. What do you do when you start a company with a bunch of people and they all leave?
Yeah. Did you sign anything?
No.
Okay.
I'm the only developer, and
Well, I mean, then in the eyes of the law, it's yours. But I would say that, I mean, at least what I would recommend to you, if you truly believe in what you're working on, I would either, one, try and find other people who, I mean, they might not be intrinsically involved, they might be interested. Or if you have the money, I would say, you know, maybe hiring people. It depends on what you're looking for. With like web development, if you're looking for developers, you could look at Elance, because those are kind of, it's like the non-professional professionals, so like the indie workers, I guess. But yeah, you can actually look at their portfolios and stuff. It's what me and one of my friends actually used to do when we were doing web development on the side to just make some money. He's now actually a professional graphic designer. So like he still uses it though, because he does side work. So like he has his whole portfolio up there, like he has animation videos and everything. And I mean, you have to really like, it's just like hiring a person, you have to vet them. You know, you have to make sure that they are who they say they are. And that's also why like understanding the languages is so important, because if you if you hired a web developer and he just like cuts and pastes codes from other websites or something, and you know, if you look at the source and you're like, what the heck, I've seen this on frickin' like Facebook or something, like being able to identify that is going to let you kind of definitely vet your workforce a lot better. So I mean, I would say either go the Elance route or go, if you need, I mean, development companies. So I mean, I actually hired a development company over going the Elance route for Cinemarama. I mean, it's a different atmosphere. I mean, you get quotes because every development company will give you a quote before they do it. The quotes range so much. I remember the second quote I got was for $150,000, and like even knowing my own, like even though I knew that I couldn't develop it in like a timely manner, I was like, there's no way that this would cost this much money, because even if I was charging someone for all the hours that I would work, I would not be making $150,000 off of this. So I mean, understanding the language again is, you know, being able to understand how much effort would actually need to be put in. Because even if you know that you personally don't know how to do something, you could still gauge, you know, how many hours this person should probably take. And obviously, of course, issues are going to come up where something might break unexpectedly or whatever, but you can still gauge for the most part how much you should be guessing. So I mean, I'd say anything above, like, at least for companies, I mean, anything above $50,000 is going to be something that they're just essentially padding their wallets with, unless it's something ridiculously complex that, I don't know, would require so much back-end development that, but I mean, for the most part, you can typically gauge the company based off of the quotes that they give you. One of the companies that they're one of the top search results for web development companies, and they told me that my business website wasn't even possible. They said that we don't even know how to do that. I'm like, I don't understand how you're a company. But I mean, you come across all types of development companies, so it's really just taking the effort to vet them. I mean, the same goes for non-website development. You know, if you're looking for lawyers, you're looking for marketing, whatever. There's also people that try to sell you on like social media likes now too, so that's always interesting. You could always, I don't know if that actually does anything or not, but so I mean, it's all just gauging, you know, exactly what you need versus what they're offering. Yeah.
What about losing friends? Happened to me with my startup, like in the first .com phase.
Yeah.
And I've heard more than losing a company.
Yeah, that's the other reason why I wouldn't recommend going into business with your friends. Unless you're truly able to separate business and friendship. If you can get into an argument with someone over, say, money, and then go to the movies with them afterwards and not actually like hate each other's guts and want to punch them in the face, I wouldn't recommend just going into business with them, because you're either going to lose a friend or a business partner, or you'll lose both, or you'll lose your company. But I mean, obviously every instance is different. There are people out there, obviously, with like Reddit and everything else. Those are people that created things with their friends, and I mean, as far as they let the public know, nothing like really happened to their friendship. But I mean, then you also look at like Facebook and Twitter, and Twitter's a lot worse than Facebook from what I've read. But I mean, you just look at those companies and you realize, you know, once big money really gets involved, you know, it can completely change not only people but dynamics of friendships. And I mean, say you had 2% more equity than your friend, and he just gets jealous because now, you know, you're selling for $10 million or whatever, and he wants that 2%. He wants that or $20,000. You know, maybe he wants to buy a new car, but you don't really know. You may think you know your best friend, but sometimes you don't really know who they are or what they want. Especially, I mean, that's when it gets intrinsic interest involved again. Knowing what they're in there for is so important, because if they're in it for the money and you're in it for the actual product, you're going to disagree a lot on final outcomes, especially when investors come up to you with a blank check saying, give us 20% of your company, and just write a number on here. He might say, just do $10 million, man, and just cash out. And you may be like, but, these people are, maybe you're an electric car company and the oil company's buying you out. Like, it really depends on what you want and what your partner wants. Anything else? I remember with the biggest investment that I got from Moto, investment offer, it was the weirdest conversations over the phone that I should have realized that I probably wouldn't be going through with this in the very first place, but the idea that someone wanted to spend this much money on something that I was a part of in itself is something that will, pique your curiosity. But it was so the guy lived in he was in Hong Kong. I don't know if he lived in Hong Kong, but the investment deal was with a company that was in the Middle East. And after he said the name of his investment firm, upon Googling it, you come across that they only do oil investments and these other types of investments. I'm like, what the heck is this? Like, both of my companies are in the entertainment industry, and nothing to do with oil or like anything that these people have in their portfolio. And so, I mean, that right there is a red flag to me, because that to me says that they're one of those companies that literally will just throw things because they have a lot of excess revenue from their other investments. And so they'll hope that, with the giant technology, hesitant to call it a bubble, but part of me thinks it's a bubble. The technology area that we're in right now, they'll just throw money at startups and then hope that one of them sticks enough so that they can kind of get their return on investment and cash out. I know that, at least in the tech conferences, there were quite a few companies that had that happen, where their investors would literally give them the first investor that they would have would give them like maybe $200,000. And they would only do that solely for the purpose of raising the company's valuation, which would then cause them to get additional investors. So then they would sell maybe another 10% for $600,000. The first $300,000 of that dollars would go back to paying the first investor, and they would pay them off for their ROI. So then you would be back down to a 10%, but then you only have $300,000. So you're back to where you started. And it's a weird place to be. It's a weird way to go about thinking, because if you think that, we'll get this investment, which will cause us to get this investment, which will cause us to get this investment, are you actually building a product, or are you building a pyramid of investments? And I know a lot of investors write their investment contracts in a way so that if you pay them back within 2 years, they don't own anything anymore. So, I mean, a lot of investors go in there with the expectation they'll just get investments, they'll pay it off because they don't want us to own 10% of their company. So they'll just, throw their money, wait a year, get their money back plus interest, and they'll be done. And then the company will just probably disappear. Because, I mean, that only goes for so far until you realize that you're not really gaining much investment money by paying off other investors. should have thought of more stories before I came here. There's, yeah.
Which would you recommend between paying with cash and paying with equity?
There was an interesting quote that I saw when Facebook bought WhatsApp for, I think it was $18 billion in shares. Companies that feel that their stock is overvalued will pay in stock. Companies that feel that they are worth more will pay in cash. If you notice, Facebook makes a lot of acquisitions in stock. But I would try and, I mean, it really depends. So like, for example, if you know that you can't do anything, you need this money to even do development on the to even create some sort of product. I would say that going the equity route might be easier because it's lower risk, because with loans then you can get yourself shot in the foot if you don't have, for example, if you actually end up owing money based off the loan, then you can completely shoot yourself in the foot if you don't actually need it. But with loans, I'd say loans are more, if you're going from like say prototype A to prototype B, or going from prototype A to actually having a full product, I'd say that a loan might actually be better if you have a good feeling about making revenue, because then you can just pay it back and you don't actually lose any equity in it. But if you desperately need the money, I'd say going the equity route is better. But being able to stand firm on your equity amount is important. I mean, people cite valuations all the time, and valuations for the most part are not exactly hard written. I know Moto's valuation was much more substantial than making money. So I mean, it becomes interesting because I have a friend who does financial investments, and he actually wrote my valuation for Cinemarama, and he was just, I remember the first thing he said to me, he was like, "What do you want it to be?" And he was like, I can do the math and make it look like you are going to be valued at like anything between $100,000 and a couple million. And I was like, it doesn't make any sense to me. It's a whole other game to play. And the investors that you run across, some will say, "What's your valuation?" And some others will say, "We'll give you X amount for Y%, which is assuming a, Z valuation." And you could come back and say, "No, I feel like we're more valued at this because of X, Y, and Z." And then, it becomes a negotiation, and some of them want to see these hard figures that aren't really hard figures. I know with Cinemarama, he created like this year and a half revenue sheet that basically projected income and revenues of Cinemarama, which were all based on assumptions. My development was delayed by a year. That wasn't in that projection. So I mean, you run into all these issues where you can say, "Oh yeah, by 2013 we'll be making $50,000 in revenue," and you might not even have a product then. So I mean, I wouldn't really call valuations anything that's withstanding to at least you, but learning how to play it is something that's important if you're looking for investors that ask for it. At which point, knowing someone who's in the financial sector is also pretty beneficial. Anything else? Oh, there is also a huge difference between West Coast and East Coast mentality with startups. I don't know if you have ever been to San Francisco, besides it smelling like a certain type of drug everywhere. The mentality there is a lot different than what New York and DC are. In San Francisco, you have a lot more laid back, let's get stack like a lot of people there care about more about investments, whereas New York is more about, at least the mentality there is get this done now. And I mean, it's kind of like the lifestyle there though, because I mean, if you go to New York, everyone's just running around, you know, yelling at each other. San Francisco, everyone's laid back. I mean, so knowing where to go, because I know that San Francisco is a hot spot for tech startups right now. But you know, if you don't live by that mentality, you're going to feel out of place there. And at least with me, I want to get things done, like immediately. So like as soon as someone says like, oh, this is a bug or this is a problem, like this has got to be fixed. So I'm like, you know, I'll be going all over the frickin' web browser, doing like looking at the code and stuff. And over there, it's just, I don't know, it's much more laid back. So I mean, that's why I would rather go to New York, but that's also why I'm probably biased with conferences too. But I don't know, it's an entirely different mentality. Let's see. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the courses that you took here and projects that you were involved in. Were there any like extracurricular things, clubs or organizations that you were involved in that were particularly helpful?
I wish InnoBlue was around when I was actually a student. I know it was starting up right when I was graduating. But I mean, even signing up as an alumni, some of their emails are extremely beneficial because sometimes they have discounts to conferences, sometimes they have speaker series. I mean, if I was in the area, it'd be a lot more beneficial. But I know that with some of the big conferences, you know, they'll have tickets or they'll say like, you know, oh, we're going as Penn State, and you can just, like for example, with Tech Day, with the first time I went, they just had me sign up as a Penn State student because they had a discount for Penn State, and so they were just like, he's an alumni, and so they just got me the discount that way, and it's extremely beneficial, especially when you're starting out, to save as much money as possible, because you know, like a couple $100 here and there may not seem like a huge amount, but it really adds up because I mean, everything just keeps adding up. Because I mean, then your developers might come back and be like, oh, you know, we worked an extra 20 hours on this, and your lawyers might be like, oh, we need another 2 contracts, and you know, you don't know what's going to happen because it's very fast-paced. And so, I mean, InnoBlue was one of the ones that I'd say really is beneficial. I know there was what is it? I forget what it was. I don't think it exists anymore, but it was an SRA club that was 7. I don't remember. But it was like a hacking club, which I found pretty beneficial because I mean you surround yourself with a lot of technical people who, you know, they may be interested in doing some sort of technical work. So I mean, if you're looking to either work with more people and finding people, you know, especially like the technical clubs may be very beneficial to finding partners or just anyone that you want either feedback or help with. So I'd say any of the very technical ones would be very beneficial. But I mean, even now with your programming classes that you added, I mean, those classes alone could help you find people like that. So. Anything else? Let's see if I have another. The very first time that I had development for Cinemarama, my original planned launch date was, I believe, November of 2012. I launched last month. That's due to a variety of factors, including not only I had a couple issues with developers, not with the company itself, but they had issues with their developers, which were completely unforeseen to me. Then I had a guy from X Factor that he lost towards the end, but he was a artist that I had been following for a couple of years, and I ended up getting his contact information. He wanted to release on Cinemarama, like his new album, because he wanted to list as a price much cheaper than what iTunes would force him to list at, which also ran into an issue because his label stepped in because he was signed under a label contract when participating in X Factor. So that delayed it by 5 months. And then last summer, we had gotten ready to launch, and there was something wrong with the way the commercial licensing was working, which ended up showing a bit of an issue in the back end, which would cause quite a bit of code to be ripped out. So we ended up actually just scrapping it and starting over for the most part. We kept quite a bit of it, but I mean, those are just things that you run into, though, and you don't, especially when you're first formulating everything and you're looking to say, oh, this is exactly what I, want. Even then, you're going to come across things that are like, oh, well, this should be changed and this should be changed, and you have to find out a point where you draw the line, because you're not going to get anything that's perfect, because you can even look at like Amazon.com or Google, and you'll be like, oh, why is this button here? Like, especially with YouTube with their weird alignment requirements now. But, there's things that are going to bug individuals, and you have to see, are you the individual, or is this something that the general populace is going to be concerned with? So after last summer, I actually did a closed beta test with a couple of my friends from the music industry, which really helped, which I would highly recommend if you're doing some sort of consumer-facing platform, is to at least have people that want the product, but they aren't involved in terms of like making money off of the product or making some sort of, or not getting any sort of like back-end benefit from using it. So I mean, obviously they'll get the benefit of using the product, but not, making money off of equity or whatever. Because then those will be people that truly want to use this product, that don't have any reason to kind of sugarcoat things. So if something's broken, they could just be like, hey, this is broken, or this is stupid, or this is not the way that I would use it. And that really helps with like the user interface. With Moto, I would definitely say that I have to watch my words because I'm still taking care of some things. It's important to keep in your head how much you feel that you are worth. It's important to know where you stand and where you provide benefit to what you're working on. Even if you're not the creator of the product, you need to have a list, at least in your head, of what you're doing for the company. Because when it comes down to it, and when it comes to disagreements and arguing, being able to prove your point and prove your side is extremely, extremely important. And if there is no paper trail, and if there is no way to prove what you've done, then it becomes a he said, she said, and if you're with the wrong people, then you're going to shoot yourself a lot of times. I wish I could say more on it. There's nothing that it was a good experience. So I mean, I'll leave it at that. It was a good learning experience, and oh yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry, only if you finish.
Oh yeah, no, you can go ahead.
When you first originally had your idea, how did you gauge interest? How did you know that it might take off? To like have to actually commit time to it?
That's a good question. With Cinemarama, I had a very strong personal interest in it, so I told myself, regardless of what, whether or not I knew that people were going to like it, I wanted to do it anyways, but that was for myself. And so, I mean, that's why that's been more bootstrapped than Moto has. With Moto, consumer interest really developed over time. It was something that required being able to look from the outside and say to yourself, okay, what are the applications for this? And at the time, at the very beginning, I wasn't really sure what the applications for this were, besides consumer facing. But as it grew and as we actually got more and more feedback, which is why going to conferences is actually pretty beneficial when it has consumer facing, because they will give you ideas and they won't even realize that they're actually helping create the product when it's in prototype, because they'll just say like, oh, could it do this or could it do that, and in the back of your head, if you store those, you'll just recall them and be like, oh, people really loved it when they were suggesting this, so then why don't we create that aspect of it? And so, I mean, that's why I went back to saying it'll evolve over time. Because over the year and a half that Moto was being developed, it went from literally being a front-facing web platform to actually focusing on the technology that was behind it, which was when we had a couple filmmakers come up to us and say, scoring movies is an absolute pain, because you have to actually figure out exactly what fits the mood. And so that's when it evolved from actually just being a front-facing browser platform to focusing on the back end, which would focus on video, photos, and text. So then we went from essentially telling investors that we were the consumer side, but we actually started focusing on the enterprise side, which is why we started getting people like HBO as our clients. And I mean, even then, judging consumer interest or judging, that this is going to be popular is still something that you're going to have to. I mean, we have, for example, we have a newsletter sign up on our site, which we would just gauge the numbers. So when we would go to tech conferences, we would see how big the numbers jumped up. And you can use that as a baseline, and especially when talking to people who might be investing, you can use those as hard figures to basically say, well, we have, this many thousand people signed up or whatever. But it still really comes down to you have to be able to say to yourself, yeah, I could see people using this. And, asking you and friends and being like, would you use this? Or, would you see any point to this? And if everyone in your circle of friends is like, no, then you might have to reconsider your approach, or, it might not even be your approach, though. It could just be your pitch, because the way you present yourself is also it determines a lot of how consumers think of your product. Because I remember the very first time that I ever pitched Cinemarama, I was so unprepared that I didn't know how to describe it, and I didn't know how to explain it to people. And investors would, they wouldn't even talk. So I mean, at that point I was just like, well, maybe this is stupid. But over time, the more you practice and the more conferences you go to, the more people you speak to about it, the better you can explain your ideas. We're out of time? Okay. Cool. Thank you.